Okay, so going to hit Kennedy's New Frontier. Part of 17.2, you have the note-taking exercise that also kind of follows the same line of information. But I wanted to get you a quick lecture outline on this as well. You guys all kind of learn differently, right? So Kennedy's New Frontier, that was his program, his campaign of the 1960s, things he wanted to accomplish. Obviously, he does get elected in 1960. It's a close election, wins by a very small margin. One of the closest elections in history up to that point. And as a result of that close election, Kennedy does not get the strong mandate that presidents like to get. And those are important because if you get a strong mandate, in other words, if you win the election overwhelmingly or win by a landslide, what it tells Congress is that the people of the United States strongly support your positions on the economy, on foreign policy, domestic programs, things of that sort. So in this case, Kennedy did not get that strong mandate. So Congress had some apprehension about some of the programs that Kennedy might want to get through Congress. You also coupled that lack of strong mandate with the fact that Congress, the makeup of Congress, was not in his favor either. Obviously, the Republican representatives in Congress are not going to be supportive of some of Kennedy's programs in theory because of the fact that Kennedy's a Democrat. Republicans in Congress are going to be voting along party lines. And in addition to that, you had a group of Southern Democrats who were not in agreement with Kennedy's reform-minded program, specifically his stance on civil rights. And so, again, you couple the lack of a strong mandate as a result of the 1960 election. You also kind of mix in, Kennedy's position on civil rights and the fact that Southern Democrats didn't support him along with Republicans. And so things are going to be kind of tough for Kennedy early on in his first or his only term in office. He did have some successes early on, specifically with the steel industry, where he successfully battled the steel industry's attempt to increase prices. He basically tried to intimidate them by guarantee that he would cancel contracts with certain steel companies if they continued to raise their prices. He was able to successfully kind of manipulate that whole process, and he kept the steel industry down and prevented those prices increased in the early part of his term as president. He also was able to successfully get aid to the poor. Kennedy was part of his campaign was providing aid to economically disadvantaged populations. He was able to get Congress to pass the Area Redevelopment Act, which was specifically targeted for economically distressed regions in the United States, urban areas, big cities, also in kind of the rural areas in the South, and get some development in those areas so that the economies can maybe be supported by some government aid. And then lastly, he was able to get Congress to pass a minimum wage increase, which raised the minimum wage from $1 to $1.25 in 1961. Now, you think a dollar, what's the minimum wage today? Like $10 or something? But just to give you a comparison, if $1 in 1961 would be the same as 12 cents in 2024. So in other words, if that $1 minimum wage was in place today, you would be making 12 cents an hour, which is kind of crazy, right? So it just gives you a comparison. But a $1 to $1.25 raise is a 25% increase. That's pretty significant. Even when our minimum wage went up in the last couple of years, it didn't go up by 25%. So these were all things that Kennedy was successful, and a lot of it was targeted towards controlling prices or giving some economic support to those who were, economically disadvantaged. The space program. So you look at the The failure of the Bay of Pigs, the success of the Soviets launching Sputnik in 1957. Also, the Soviets were able to launch a man into orbit and successfully orbit the Earth. All these things were negatives for the United States. And in response to this, Kennedy, and there was panic, like people were panicking that the Soviets had surpassed us in technology and so forth, and military and things of that sort. And so Kennedy, had to find a way to kind of level the playing field, so to speak. So during his campaign, and I believe it was in his acceptance speech, he announced that the United States had planned on landing a man on the moon by the end of the decade, which would be 1969, which is exactly when it happens. You can see the Time magazine insert here. You can see April of 1969. That was the cover of Time. And so, that was successful. And it was a huge step towards, for the United States, as we were able to accomplish that before the Soviets could. And again, you can get into conspiracy theories as to whether that actually did happen or if it was staged or whatever. But for our purposes, we're going to go with the fact that it was successfully accomplished. Another part of this unit was on the Warren Court, which is part of the Supreme Court. Chief Justice Earl Warren, that's why it's referred to as the Warren Court, made several significant landmark decisions relative to individual rights and freedoms. One of which was several voting laws were enacted. 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed. That wasn't a Supreme Court thing, but it just showed how Kennedy's position, and then that was also the position of Lyndon Johnson to give voting rights specifically to African-American rights in the South. Because even though they had the right to vote by definition, a lot of barriers were put in place in the South to prevent African-Americans from voting, whether they were, intelligence quizzes that they had to take, or some kind of poll tax that was initiated. Most of the African-Americans in the South were poor, and they couldn't pay any money to vote, which are now all illegal, by the way. But anyways, one of the things that they implemented in the Warren Court was the concept of one man, one vote, which was specific to the way that legislative districts were being constructed. The way that the Warren Court had ruled in this case was, and there's several different cases that were lumped into one, is that legislative districts needed to have equal populations regardless of size. So in order to kind of explain it, let me show you what Michigan looks like. So here's Michigan, and all these little squares you see here, those are the counties in Michigan. The different colors are congressional districts. And you can see that the different colors are different sizes, like the UP and most of the very extreme north of the Lower Peninsula is green. That's one congressional district. When you compare that down here to the Detroit area, you look at District 10 here, it's relatively small, obviously in size. But the important key to know that is that population in the green region and population in this region right here are the same. So basically what that meant is it guaranteed that people were getting equal representation, because you couldn't have the same sizes because population density, right? So if you had Detroit have this size, right, and then you went up here and have that same size up in the UP, maybe you're talking about literally 100 people like would live in that general region of that size up in this region up here. Where in Detroit area, that little area would maybe represent 100,000 people. So in other words, it was unequal in terms of the way the representative was. Each one of these representatives would be attached to one of these areas. So one person represents this area, one representative represents this area, and one representative represents this area. You can see there are 13 districts here in Michigan, congressional districts. And we have 2 senators. That's why there's 15 electoral votes for the state of Michigan. because we have 13 congressional districts and 2 senators. That's how they divvy up the electoral votes. So anyways, somewhat confusing. It makes more sense when you look at it from this standpoint. Just know that that was done specifically to give urban areas an equal representation to those areas in the rural areas that had larger size. Other rights of the accused. There were 3 specific court cases that were ruled on by the Warren Court, all dealing with the rights of the accused. And you'll be familiar with not maybe the names, but what they stood for. So Gideon versus Wainwright stipulated that states must provide lawyers at no cost, right? So when we talk about the Miranda rights, right, you'll be afforded a lawyer if you cannot afford one, or you'll be assigned a lawyer if you cannot afford one, right? That comes from this case. People have the right to a lawyer during police questioning. If you watch like some of the lawyer shows like Law and Order or Chicago PD, you'll see they have someone in the questioning room and the guy will, lawyer, I want a lawyer. And if he asks for a lawyer, the police cannot question them anymore. And then kind of summing this up, the last one is the Miranda versus Arizona, the famous Miranda rights, which is, you have the right to remain silent. Anything that you say can and will be used you against court of law, that came from this court case. And basically it says when someone is accused of a crime or arrested for a crime, they must be read their rights before the police can question them in any way. So you see that these 2 cases are directly linked. This one obviously is linked as well, but not in a direct way like these 2 are, right? And then the last one is a religious freedom ruling in Engel versus Vitale, which basically said that formal prayer cannot be a requirement in the public school. In other words, it banned organized religion in public schools. That's why we can't have religious courses that are required in a public school. We can have religious courses, but they have to be electives. That's why a teacher cannot make you say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Because in the Pledge of Allegiance, it says, I pledge allegiance to the flag under God, that type of thing. So because it says that, you can't make that a requirement. So that was passed during the mid to early 1960s as well. So anyways, that just summarizes this part of section 2 of chapter 17. Your note